Welcome, everybody. We are very excited to present to you our Celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month panel, and we have guests from people on Respectability staff, fellows, and board members, and we'd love to share with you some stats on um, an overview of what the situation is for people with disabilities in general. Um, as you know, disabilities can be temporary or permanent, visible or non-visible, from birth or adopted later. Anyone can join the disability community at any point due to aging, illness, accidents, or trauma. The disability community is diverse. People with disabilities from underrepresented communities face double discrimination, including disability and diversity. Organizations at their best are at their best when they welcome, respect, and include people of all backgrounds. This includes people with disabilities. 1 in 4 adults has a disability. People with disabilities want opportunities just like everybody else. Just an overview on employment, there are more than 5.4 million Hispanic Latinx people living with a disability in the US. The disability employment rate for working age Hispanic Latinx people with disabilities was 40.9% in 2019. That is a 36.1% lower than the employment rate for working age Hispanic Latinx people without disabilities. Like African Americans, Latinos are overrepresented in essential jobs that increase their exposure to the virus. Education. Public schools serve over 2 million Hispanic Latinx students with disabilities. 27% of all special education students in America are Hispanic and Latinx. Among English language learners, there are more than 800,000 students with disabilities, making up 15% of English language learner students. And that just gives you an overview of the context in which uh, Latinx with disabilities face and live in. And I would welcome uh, our board member, Victor Pineda, to introduce himself. And uh, I will start asking questions, and everyone, before you answer the question, please make sure to introduce yourself. I forgot to introduce myself. I am a staff member with RespectAbility, and I am the manager for policy advocacy and civic engagement. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deli. Thanks to everybody in Respectability for putting this important conversation together. I'm a board member of Respectability, but I'm also very much committed to ensuring that we are seen and heard as people that identify as Hispanic or Latinx and have the intersectional identity of having a disability, being proud of having a disability. It's very, to me, personal. I'll just start off with some opening remarks and then pass it back to Nelly and our colleagues to take the conversation forward. But we're gathered here for two primary reasons. First is because it is apparent that the disability community has made great progress in the US to change laws, and that the Latinx and Hispanic community has also made great progress in being visible. However, there's a gap, and that gap exists at the intersection between the Hispanic and Latinx communities and the disability community. So one of the big questions are, why are we why do we continue to be invisible within the broader Latinx and Hispanic Heritage Month celebrations and in a variety of conversations that happen on Congress, with the Hispanic Congressional Caucus, or with the, you know, television, film, media policy and so on, and employment rates, as well as we heard the statistics. The other question becomes, what do we do to ensure that the broader disability community also respects, uplifts, and really understands the nuances of our experience? I know there's some really great people in attendance on this call that are going to be able to also jump in with questions and share lived experiences. But I'll just sort of set the stage by giving you 2 or 3 important touch points. I was born in Venezuela. I am an immigrant. I grew up speaking Spanish, but I also have the experience of coming to this country and having to learn to speak English and being discriminated against because I was, considered to not be American, even though I was 7 years old and I grew up here and I am a U.S. citizen. I also carry the privilege of having an opportunity to have a very good education, which I would not have had in my country. In Venezuela, one of the primary reasons why my mother came to the U.S. was because, as a mother of a disabled child, she understood that I would not have the protections in Venezuela as I had here. I would not have the laws. I would not have support services in the classroom. So I do feel a deep sense of pride as an immigrant, as an American, and as a member of the Latinx community to have had opportunities in this country that really were denied to me in my home country. And many of our parents and grandparents, whether or not they had disabilities, they sought out opportunities in this country. But that doesn't mean that we have to be complacent. It doesn't mean that we have to sort of just be content. It means that we have to advance the struggle for social justice for our communities and understand that there is inequity in outcomes on education for Latinx students with disabilities. There is inequality in outcome and employment for Latinx individuals entering the labor force with disabilities. There is inequality in opportunity and outcomes when it comes to health and health equity. So I believe each one of us has a role to play in both celebrating the progress that our respective communities have made, but strengthening our commitments to that intersection where we see ways of strengthening the dialogue on Latinx experience within the disability community and the dialogue on the disability experience within the Latinx community. So I headed back to my good friend Nellie, who is going to lead a discussion and really elevate sort of practical ways that we can make progress together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Victor. Dr. Berneda. One of the first questions I wanted to ask all the panelists is, what needs to change in order to bridge the gap between the broader disability community and specific subsections of, what gap between the broader disability community and the specific subsections of the disability community Hispanic? How do we take responsibility to fill that gap?
Well, let's make sure that everybody on the call knows who else is speaking. So I would introduce myself. Yeah, I'm Victor Pineda. I'm both a faculty at UC Berkeley. I'm the president of World Enabled, a global nonprofit advancing radical inclusion through policy and social justice work. but I'm also a two-time presidential appointee to the U.S. Federal Access Board, and I helped negotiate the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. So that's a bit of background on me, Krista.
Krista?
Hi, my name is Krista. I am the current Entertainment, Media, and Communications Fellow here at RespectAbility. I am currently a graduate student at UCLA, currently getting my MA in Design and Media Arts, just living in the intersection of film and art, and really just trying to create representation for people with disabilities in my work. So I'm pretty excited about that. My background is pretty similar to Dr. Pineda's. I am also an immigrant. I came here when I was 6 years old from Guatemala, also seeking better health care. I had a spinal cord tumor at the time that was led to my SCI. And I am also one that has, been privileged enough to um, really take advantage of everything the American healthcare system, as flawed as it is, has provided me. I think I was able to get things here that weren't even comparable in my home country. So pretty excited to be here. And yes, that is my introduction.
Great, Krista. I would love to hear your perspective on the question that I asked Dr. Pineda and you regarding the closing the gap between the disability community and the subsections, the Hispanic community with disabilities, and what could be done, or what could be done to address the gap between those two populations.
I think it's definitely a very difficult intersection, one that I've definitely had to navigate since I got to the United States. Just entering the education system as a disabled individual, and also one that didn't speak English. I had a 504 plan. I think that's what they're called. In school, so I was given a para-pro to sort of help me like physically navigate the classroom, but like no one really had the experience to help me navigate the classroom as a Spanish speaker. I didn't really have ESL classes or anything. I just kind of figured it out, and I think it would just make sense to have someone that knows how to navigate both both identities of students. I hope that answers the question.
Like, it gives us a perspective from a student's perspective and going into the duality of our identities. For me, I think trying to build bridges between different organizations like Hispanics in Philanthropy, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, which I happen to be an alumni of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Fellowship, talking to these specific fellowships and pipelines and building partnerships with them and saying, hey, we have the qualified candidates, tell us when your deadlines are, tell us what your fellowship entails, and we can create the pipeline for more people with disabilities that are part of the Hispanic community, that also represent an identity and an overcoming of struggle, that can also be an asset to your fellowship and any future career they decide to go into. So my approach would be to not be afraid to challenge the current Hispanic serving institutions um, like Arizona State University, all these different universities, to also have special orientations that kind of connect them to their fellow Latinos, Latinx students, so that they don't feel so isolated when they're transitioning into an educational setting that might be totally different from their home setting. So those are three kind of aspects that I would kind of try to implement as a program or policy, program and partnerships between different nonprofits like RespectAbility and the Hispanic Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute. Um, and a little bit of my background. I was born to immigrants. They both emigrated in the 70s, and I was born with cerebral palsy. And it wasn't until they found a Spanish speaking doctor that they were able to kind of pinpoint that I had cerebral palsy. And it was because of his guidance that they were able to find the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, where I received most of my care. For me, I remember the exact instance that I learned when I was switching into a language was in first grade when a kid asked me for his pencil, and I was thinking in Spanish. I'm like, "That's a lápiz. That's a pencil." And next thing you know, I'm like, "Okay, I'm putting the words together," and it's like, "That's a pencil. Here's your pencil." And I heard myself say those things, and it was a really crystallizing moment where, wait a minute, I have to learn two languages, not only my home language being Spanish and being able to navigate the English world of education. I also was able to excel and be quote unquote mainstreamed. So basically, I was one of the few kids that was mainstreamed into quote unquote uh, non-disabled classroom where um, regular students, quote unquote regular students, people without disabilities, were taught, and that was the hardest transition because kids really didn't know how to deal with me. They either teased me or isolated me because I was so different, or I was their best friend. So I had two extremes. But I was lucky to receive a very strong healthcare background as well as an educational background, which eventually led to me going to the University of Southern California, excelling there with a lot of institutional fighting to get the accommodations I needed, and eventually being accepted to Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, which allowed me to have a career in public policy. Um, it's constantly navigating not only your identity as a person of color who speaks another language, it's also fighting for the accommodations that you are entitled to as a US citizen. It's always being able to code switch between those two worlds that I found interesting when it came to trying to build partnerships and trying to address those gaps between the disabled community and the Hispanic community with disabilities. Um, Let me get back to the questions. 1 second. Um, I was wondering, how can your disability and ethnic identity be seen as an asset? Krista, could you take that one first?
Yeah, sure. I would say that I definitely bring in a different voice into my programs at school. I think right now I'm the only Latinx student in my program, and I can already tell that a lot of the work and a lot of the material that we're getting to read is Eurocentric. Just a lot of perspectives that don't really take into consideration, the history of people that have been here for a while. So I think I really get to raise those questions in class and really like bring things into perspective and really open the doors for them to think about these things, and also like make them think about admitting more students with this background. Yeah.
Perfect. Victor?
Yeah, just a brief review. I think Krista's very right, but I do think that there's a really important role to understand that you know both the unique aspect of this experience is that although we have similarities, the disability community is very diverse, and the Latinx community is very diverse. There are Latinx people that have a variety of different lived experiences, racial identities, um, socioeconomic experiences. The Latinx immigrant isn't just, a immigrant from Central America. It's also, a doctor from Argentina or a scientist, from Costa Rica or whatever. So I think what I'm trying to say is that celebrating the advantages of both of those communities and just standing their diversities gives you a lot of access to different ways of engaging with with folks. So it is. I would kind of invite us to realize that we the intersection is quite rich because each of the intersectional identities is a plurality of themselves. So whether you're Central American, South American, whether you come from a Latinx background of immigrants that had a higher socioeconomic status or lower socioeconomic status, I mean, there's just so much diversity. So I think we need to celebrate that as well, and try to avoid like any sort of simplifications, but at the same time find the common threads. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. I would agree with Victor's perspective, Dr. Pineda's perspective, when it came to the diversity within the community. My mother brings an entrepreneurial spirit. As she, immigrated to this country, prior to that, she had a small business in her home country, and she tried to translate that into a business here, but due to the language barrier and the bureaucracy, she was forced to focus more on other aspects of her um, spirit of entrepreneurship, as well as being someone who was always coming up with ideas. Uh, a lot of them were translated into uh, adaptive, adaptive equipment she made up so that I could have an easier time walking around the house. But her energy as an entrepreneur never stopped, and those assets do come from the Latinx background and the experience of being one. Um, and I really appreciate you expounding on the diversity of experience of a Latinx uh, pop of the Latinx population, as well as being a person with a disability. The intersectionality between those two identities um, are intertwined in my reality as a person of color with a disability. I can't separate myself from being a person with a disability and the Latina. It's together. It meshes together to make who I am as a person. So my drive, my entrepreneurship, the way I see my disability as an asset, uh, my drive is because of my mother, because of my father, because of their spirit of wanting to improve themselves and be entrepreneurs. So yes, Victor, thank you very much. Uh, moving on to the next question. Um, I'm I'm wondering, um, where is the money, resources? How do we create explicit funding streams for this intersection? How do we create targeted investments so that people that have our experiences, or those who have different experiences from us, have the same equitable chances to succeed in this country? Krista?
I'm gonna hand that one over to Dr. Pineda. I'm not sure I know enough to speak on that.
Okay.
So, can you repeat the question?
Yeah. Where is the money / resources? How do we create explicit funding streams for this intersection of population? How do we create targeted investments so that people within the disabled community / Hispanic community with disabilities can come together.
So that's a really important question, and I'm really happy that you asked it. I think at the end we realized, for example, the census was very important because the census helps us be visible. The census helps us understand data. The census helps us direct resources. But there's also, like you said, Nelly, there's relationships. Your relationships unlock resources as well. The, the fact that, Anna Marie Arguiagos from Hispanics in Philanthropy is a great ally of the disability community. That could open up you really resources. The fact that we have, variety of Latinx and Hispanic leaders in both, local government, state government, national government, creating alliances and elevating, the understanding with a data-driven approach what that compounded inequality is, and then being able to make a compelling case as to why, for example, the state of California should be supporting youth development programs specifically for Latinx youth with disabilities, or how to ensure outreach to vocational training and internship opportunities when we talk about equity access. And diversity programs, are they also incorporating disabled youth in those sort of job training, entrepreneurial? So there's just a lot of spaces where we need to be sophisticated enough to identify the specific data backed evidence for that gap, and then use that data backed evidence, like you started this conversation, Ellie, with a lot of data, to basically say, there's hundreds of thousands of students, Latinx students with disabilities, that have a very different home life, than their Asian American or African American counterparts, because of this experience, because of additional barriers, whether it's language, whether it's cultural notions of disability within the Latinx community. I mean, there's a variety of ways that we need to understand how to talk about those gaps, and then be able to raise awareness, whether it's in our school district with the superintendent, whether it's in our parents' companies, or our companies where we work. Maybe they have, social impact work that they're doing on equity, access, inclusion, internship programs. So I don't have a simple solution. I just think that there are more than enough resources. It's up to us to ensure that they're directed towards filling the gap, filling the specific areas of intervention.
Thank you, Victor. Dr. Pineda. From my policy experience, what I've through my work in respectability and working with the LA County Workforce Board and trying to connect with other workforce boards around the state, that's a key area where job creation and recruitment of people with disabilities could be an equalizer. It's very interesting that when you look at their plans, initially they speak about the population with disabilities as an area of need, but when you look at the plans, they need integration in every facet, be it retention, being education, being recruitment, and then and then advancement. So one of the key areas of investment I would be pushing for would be investment in workforce boards, so that there's an actual initiative that focuses on people with disabilities, and specifically people of color with disabilities, so that they can advance, given the double hurdle that we overcome and excel. uh, I think having that kind of apprenticeship model that allows us to use not only local workforce investment funds, but also the federal Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act funding, so that we can have these pipelines created, so that jobs are created specifically for our population to be able to have the career making jobs that will help them excel in society and influence policy and society in general. Um, thank you. I am very interested in hearing your perspective, since a lot of us have gone through the pandemic. What do both of you think of the current state of people with disabilities? Let me read you the question that I have. What are the current issues facing Hispanics and Latinx people with disabilities as a result of the pandemic? I'm going to hand it off to you, Krista, because I think you could give us a perspective, especially being a grad student and having to adapt to maybe the new way things are being taught.
Yeah, I would say there's definitely a mental health crisis that is going to need to be addressed pretty soon. Just with the isolation that comes with, well, first of all, being disabled and being especially vulnerable to COVID, and having to have that awareness and care that able-bodied people don't necessarily have. I think there's just a lot of depression and loneliness that comes with that, and I think that's something that we need to be aware of and hopefully support each other through as disabled individuals.
I definitely agree with you, Krista. The mental health aspect of dealing with the pandemic and dealing with the isolation has been a hurdle that many people with disabilities have encountered. I think as a Latina, having my culture not really talk about mental health has been another barrier that that I faced, especially um, you know, seeing how my mom reacted to the loss of my father during the pandemic. One of the key things that happened was that she didn't talk about it. She doesn't talk about it. And one of the key things that I was exposed to early was actual help and having group support that help with my grief. But you see the contrast with my mother, that doesn't she doesn't have that support, so her grief is compounded. So you definitely do hit on a key issue that most people with disabilities and Latinx community is facing. It might not be a loss of a loved one, but it can be the isolationist feeling that you get from not being able to see your friends and interact with them and be with them, that also can affect your state of mind. um, Victor, do you have any insights on how the pandemic has impacted the Latinx community with disabilities?
Yeah, I think that you bring a really important point. We are triply, quadruply affected. First, because we tend to live in larger family units. We tend to be frontline workers. We tend to have intergenerational families with older adults and grandparents. And from the disability perspective, we also tend to have, this combination of having to have family members be frontline workers and then having family members that are especially vulnerable, which is the abuelas and the kids with disabilities, or the adults with disabilities. So it's really a very unique kind of combination for our community of threats. But it also is an opportunity, again, if we stay on message, if we're clear, about how our experience matters and how our lives matter with, within this context and how we need to shape the new normal. Those are the kind of conversations that are really important because when the administration says we need to build back better, the question is build back better for who?
Mm-hmm.
Build back better how? Build
Yeah.
back better, what wasn't good before the pandemic? What did we learn at this intersectional point of identities? How does that not only help the Latinx community and Latinx community with disabilities, but how do those experiences help us create a new normal for everybody? Does that make sense? So there's part of it is targeting experiences just at the intersection, but part of it is just building a more robust system for all of our communities when the new pandemics come, when the next round of lockdowns happen, right? So really evolving our notion of what we want to achieve as a country by leveraging the very specific experience of the Latinx community. Nelly and Krista, you guys are doing really great work. Unfortunately, I have to jump on a call. I am presenting a training to the Inter-American Development Bank, which is a training on how to ensure countries throughout Central and South America can elevate accessibility and what they can do to create programs that don't discriminate against people with disabilities in Central and South America. So that's part of my contribution to Hispanic Heritage Month as well. So thank you for having me, and I wish you the best of luck with the rest of the discussion.
Thank you for being with us. It's been an honor.
Thank you, Krista. Keep up the great work. And if anybody wants to reach out to me, my email is just victor@worldenabled.org. And I'm happy to be of service and a role model to anybody that wants to advance these issues. All right, thanks. Bye. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Victor. Thank you. I am looking at our questions and I'm wondering if there are any questions in the audience for right now, or else I can move on to my next question as a moderator. Are there any questions, Eric or Jake?
None so far, but again, another reminder, feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box. And if you're watching us on Facebook, I'm checking the comments on Facebook as well. So you can also leave a comment and ask a question that way.
Okay. Oh, I would have. This is the next question I have. What systemic cultural barriers do Hispanics / Latinx people with disabilities face to full inclusion in society? Krista?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, sure, no problem. What systemic or cultural barriers do Hispanics, Latinx people with disabilities face to the full inclusion of society? So, what barriers are there that prevent people with disabilities of Hispanic or Latinx descent from being fully included in society?
Okay. I would say Hispanic culture, it hurts me to say, but we still have a long way to go towards including people with disabilities, even in the conversations that we have and in the way that we talk about people with disabilities. I would even say, like, within my own family, there's definitely a nuance that comes with disabilities that they don't seem to grasp, and I definitely have to hold their hand and explain to them that sometimes their language isn't as accurate or it doesn't translate right. and sometimes it can be more harmful than good, even though their intentions are good. They always have our best interest in mind, but I think there's still a long way to go, and there's just a language barrier is what I would say there is, and there's just something we need to do to address it. So, yes.
Awesome. Oh, I have a question for you. How do you think social media can benefit the disabled Latinx society to interconnect and help advance each other? This is a question from our audience.
So is that in the chat?
Yes, it's in the chat. It's by Roy Payan.
I think, I mean, at least from my own personal experience with social media, I think it definitely helps you get more awareness out, and just like, I think disability is sometimes still a little bit taboo for people and they don't really want to talk about it. And there's either they're scared to like say the wrong things, and it just really opens the door for questions. And that's the way I found it, especially with my TikTok. Don't look it up, but yeah, just like normalizing disability and just opening up conversations about it and saying it's not scary. You can ask things and we'll answer them, and then yeah. Like,
I think social media, like you said, opens up the communication between people who've never interacted with people with disabilities. You know, for example, you know, my niece doesn't speak to me very often, but then when I text her or when I do something on TikTok, she'll ask me all these questions about, you know, what do you do when people stare at you, you know? And I'm like, well, I ignore them because I know I'm fabulous. They don't know how fabulous I am, so I just walk by. You know, it's I think social media is more of a tool for self advocacy too when it comes to pushing for people, especially decision makers, to push for legislation that will benefit our community. And I've seen it work effectively. I mean, every elected official has a Twitter handle, and if you have a specific advocacy ask or have a group of people that can bombard the Twitter and also call the offices, they move fast. So I've seen the power of social media to advocate and change policy to be more inclusive of our needs.
I also, at least from my experience, I've also seen it as a tool to like connect us to other disabled people. I've met a lot of other great people through Instagram or TikTok that will just DM, and then suddenly you meet this person that has like a very similar experience to you. Especially being a wheelchair user, I think there's a big community online and on Instagram, and I think it's great that we just get to connect with each other. And I think there's just a lot of commonality in that. So
Oh, this is a perfect question for you. Another question. What power does the entertainment field and authentic storytelling have in quote unquote normalizing disability or other marginalized identities?
I think it's just really normalizes disability to see somebody on a wheelchair on screen being a love interest. That's something that I've experienced in multiple shows this year, that I've seen like shows like the L Word or like Sex Education. They're for the first time like bringing these characters as people that are like worthy of being in romantic relationships. And like as a kid, I never saw that. I never saw myself in any of these characters. Even as a Latina, I think it was really hard to really identify or really see what was possible. But I think with film and television, we can really show kids what they're capable of and what they're worthy of. So yeah.
Yeah. For me, the word normalize, I tend to fight against it. For me, it's we are who we are. We're part of the reality. There's no there's no difference between a person without and a person with a disability when it comes to living life. you have the same desires, the same goals, you
Mhm.
know, having a family, having not having a family, traveling the world, learning languages, having your own home. We all have the same goals and and dreams to achieve. It's just when I hear the word normalize, I'm like, I'm normal. You
Yeah.
just don't, like for me, I like to, I would say a person with a disability, I'm person first focused,
Mhm.
very much. And so for me, I guess entertainment, like you said, it's not until I'm in my early 40s that I'm seeing people of color be love interests who are disabled, and I'm sitting here who have disabilities. Um, for
What was
me,
what was your first experience seeing yourself on television or film?
well, the first person that I ever saw was the lead chief of staff in this old TV show called ER, and it's a woman on crutches who was the chief of staff to the whole group, and she was in love. Her partner was a person from Africa, and she runs and grabs him and just kisses him on screen. And I'm like, that can happen. I was so excited to just see somebody who reflected not only my use of crutches, but also, I saw another portrayal of someone in a wheelchair. Now that I use my wheelchair, I'm like, that's right. We can be romantic leads. And not only are we romantic leads, but we bring the spice to the scene too. You know, it was just an amazing moment of we exist.
Yeah.
Hmm. It was wonderful. Um, oh, I we have a couple of minutes left. I know that there's a question on how to become more involved with respectability. I know that you can email us at Jay, can you help me with the email if anyone wants to get involved with respectability or is interested in any of our fellowship programs?
I would recommend that if you're interested, go to respectability.org, our website. I'll put this in the chat. There's a form you can fill out there at the bottom of the page with ways you can sign up to volunteer. And and oh, you can sign up for our newsletter. And yeah, and our fellowship is also on our website. You can find more information on that there as well. So I'm gonna put a separate link in for that in the chat box.
Awesome. I guess one more question to close it out. What would be your ultimate message to the audience about being a Latino with a disability? What's your ultimate closing message for the audience, Krista?
Um, I would say that I think it's kind of a lonely experience, from being honest with you.
Uh-huh.
Um, just navigating so many things all at once and not really having other people that go through the same experiences, because you can definitely meet people that like encompass, like, let's say, like your Latina Central American background, and then another person that like really engages with your disability. But I mean there's more of us out here, and I I I I think we just all need to work harder at connecting with each other.
I think we should create an affinity group for
Hmm.
Latinos with disabilities. Okay. I have the idea. Now let's operationalize it. I'm thinking to myself.
Do
All
it.
right. All right. Let's do it. Um I am well, I just want to thank everyone for coming to this webinar. We hope that it's been informative to you and has opened a new perspective. And just my closing thoughts are, people of Latinx background with disabilities, we are a unique gem that has like under pressure become a shining gem of example of how um, intersectionality is an asset, how intersectionality is a power, and how intersectionality influences our work and how we pursue our dreams. And we just want to be able to say, we are just like everybody else. You are welcome to ask us questions, but thank you for attending this webinar. And if there's any lasting question, please let me know.